Day, and this is a special edition of the thing I do, which is bringing helpful, practical things to you that will help you better navigate this thing we call life. And so today I have two special guests. These are two of my dearest friends. They're two of the smartest people I know, and they're certainly two of the most empathetic and compassionate people that I know. They are authors. Karl is a former pastor. He's a former theologian, and he's an engineer. And then Laura is a teacher by profession. But they together have written this book that's called Into the Desert. And we want to talk about this book today. So Karl, Laura, welcome. Introduce yourselves and do your thing.
All right. Thank you. Go
Thanks.
first.
No, I was excited to be on today, and because you are someone we really respect and love, and we just want to publicly, because this is publicly, we talk about you all the time, Derrick, as the one person who has been consistently with us, no matter how much our views may be different or alike. But also, Carl had a stroke in January, and you have been the one person who has just been there for us with a phone call, with a text message. And so I just want to say to people out there who give you shit all the time for the things you say, that you are the most compassionate, giving people that we know. And you have nothing to do with Christianity. And that speaks volumes to me. So just publicly, thank you for who you are, what you do. And we're just honored to know you and to be a part of this today.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah.
The end.
At the end. It's good to be here. What I would say, Derrick, is just love you, man.
Yeah.
And we appreciate the things you do. But also, when people talk about, like in the book, Out in the Desert, we talk about community. And because people always say the church is community. But what we come to find out when we take a step back is that the church is faux community. It's not real community. It's common enemy, intimacy. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of things like that. But it's not real community. And we have found true community in the desert with Jason Elam that we went to visit last year, with you, with Aaron Tomlinson and Kyle Butler. Just dozens mm-hmm. of really, really good friends that we love as much as we ever loved anybody in the church. And like Laura alluded to, after my stroke, hardly anyone from our former churches reached out to us at all.
Well, no one reached out to me. I don't know if anybody reached out to you.
Yeah, and occasionally I get a younger person that some younger people from our old churches still follow me and so on. But within the church, I haven't felt that love. It's more like criticism and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it's not that people don't love me. I'm sure there's someone in those churches that cared about us, but they're in a system that focuses all on the organization. It focuses on what they're doing to support their pastor and their organization. And the individuals, even within the church, left out. There's just not time, mm-hmm. right? A highlight of that right now is the holidays. They're busier than crap right now, preparing for the program to bring people in to market the church to people. Mm-hmm. Way too busy to do things like give me a phone call every week after my stroke. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I kind of went off on a sidetrack already, but just to say we love you.
Let me just say this. I love you guys, and you guys have been just really, really good friends, really good allies. I consider you guys brothers and sisters, not just friends. But let's get into this book, because I could
Yeah.
sit up and just sing you guys' praises for at least an hour. uh, and,
Same.
Same here.
but let's talk about the book. And so I said into the desert, and so it's actually out of the desert, right?
Out
So
into the desert.
oh, it's into the desert. So I
Out.
got the title out.
No,
Wait a minute.
out into the desert.
Out
Out
into the
into
desert.
out into the desert. Okay, so I
There you go.
completely
Yes.
fucked it up.
Oh, it's
You
okay.
guys,
All right.
please forgive me. Charge it to my head and not my heart. So,
All right.
but
No, you're good.
here's the thing. I always talk about, my favorite author. You guys are right up there. You're in my top 5. But my favorite author is Simon Sinek, and he wrote a book called Start with Why, right? And so the first thing that I want to do is talk about Out into the Desert. What is the why of this book? What is the undergirding message? What is it that you're projecting? That's the thing. What is the why?
Yeah. So several people had an influence on us in our journey. We started deconstructing probably in 2016 and so on. And we were probably already out of mainstream church. We might have been attending a bigger church, kind of hiding out. But Cindy Wong Brandt from Taiwan encouraged us to take a year off and just take a gap year from church and see if, get a perspective and so on. And so when we did, we began to get some perspective, but we wanted to do an evaluation and say why. Is it really true that organized religion may not be as viable as it used to be? So the first 10 chapters in the book were written to people inside and outside the church, just to share our evaluation and to share our stories of what we went through. We ended up telling our story and tell the painful stories of ministry. And those first 10 chapters were, let's evaluate Christianity. And we came across things like it's addictive, and would Jesus go to church? How religion ruined our sex life and things like that. So all of those things came in, and it was just an evaluation. The last part of the book is more just an honest assessment of are we really thriving? Are we faking ourselves out here, saying that we're thriving? Because it was starting to feel better. We were outside of religion, and things were starting to be more peaceful for us, more fulfilling. Took less, and we got more, things like that. And so it was written both to people in religion who may be questioning or want to do an evaluation, and also to people that are in the desert where they've already begun that journey and they're just trying to find some language that relates.
I feel like my why was purely personal, selfish, and I don't say that like apologetically at all. For me, I feel like after 20 plus years as a pastor's wife, I was completely silenced in the church. So for me, writing this was very healing. It was giving me the opportunity to figure out what I believed at the time, because I had so many questions during ministry. But as a Southern Baptist pastor's wife, you do not ask questions. Like, your job is to be very subservient and make sure that whatever you do, you don't jeopardize the ministry of your husband. So, and that came from top down. I want people to understand, like, that was not a message I was getting from Karl, although it was like, we never discussed that. So I guess it was just kind of like, we figured it was the norm, but that's coming down from the top. So the organization. So for me, it was a very healing type journey. One of the questions that, or some of the advice I got, I guess I should say advice. Some of the advice I got when I first started deconstructing was, you need to figure out like who you are, what you believe. Just what are your hobbies? Just very small things that I think get very lost.
Mhm.
It did for me along the way. So for me, it was just a means of being able to talk out kind of what my experience was inside ministry and inside the church, and to help myself heal from that really chaotic journey.
So that's a really big thing. I think that that people who are seeking, I mean, genuinely seeking, that because you get told a lot of things in church. You get told you have a party line that you're expected to tote, and
Right.
so when you have this epiphany that says, okay, maybe I need to reconsider some of what I've been taught. I need to reconsider some of what I assume myself to be. So I think that what you guys are doing here is, Laura, to your point, is very healing. That is cathartic to people.
Mhm.
Um, and I want you guys to unpack this a little bit, because one of the things that I think that people go through in deconstruction is this sense of loneliness,
Mhm.
this sense of
Mhm.
detachment. And so how does the book, uh how can I say, how does it reach out to people and explain to them, listen, you're not alone. That there is always someone out there who hears you, not just
Mhm.
listens to
Mhm.
you, but hears you. And so if you
Mhm.
can unpack that just a little bit.
I think that was huge for me, actually. I kinda wrote that down before we started recording. You kinda, like, told us some of the things you were gonna be talking about during this show, but I think that was part of me wanting to write it. Yes, it was very healing. I was very, like, taking care of myself during the writing of
Mhm,
this book. Like, I want people to know, here's what I experienced, but I also wanted to be able to validate other people's journeys. And in talking on podcasts, writing this book, sharing what we've done with writing this book, people have been able to say, like, yes, that was my experience
Mhm.
too. And you're right. What I feel like, yes, when we first deconstructed, it was very lonely, but ministry was incredibly
Yeah,
lonely for me.
that's right.
Incredibly
And
lonely.
for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
but in different, probably different
Different
ways,
ways.
but
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so, like, I guess exchanged one loneliness for another,
Mhm.
and I think I
Yeah.
just wanted people to understand, like, ministry can be very lonely. And yes, going out into the desert is scary and it is lonely. But I hope that what I convey in telling my story is that, yes, you are not alone. And I validate and I see you and I hear you. I've been there. And here's the truth of it, though. Even if I haven't experienced exactly what you've experienced, your story is still sacred. Your story is still true and you are worth believing.
Mm.
So that is, like, just kind of my huge overall message to people.
Yeah.
Well, let me say something real quick, Carl, before you, because you guys, we're talking about loneliness, right? And there's a Pew study that says that 75% of senior pastors say that they have no close friends.
Mm,
Mhm. True.
That is an actual statistic. It's an actual metric. But what's
wow.
funny is there is no statistic that covers the wives of pastors.
Mm.
Mm.
And I wonder what that looks like. I just wanted to chime
Mhm.
that in before Carl goes in.
That would be really interesting. That would be
Yeah.
really interesting.
So one key thing to all of this, Rob Bell has a podcast out there. It's about an hour and a half long. It's called A Fish Standing on the Beach. And you think about that metaphor for a minute. Think about a fish that has always been in the water standing on the beach, and he notices all of this stuff he's never seen before. And also, he gets perspective on the water because the water he's been swimming in is his whole world, and that's what he sees. He's so close to the water, he really can't see the water. He sees what's in the water, and that's all he sees. You go back to Plato's, cave analogy, maybe for a similar thought on that. But just we were always taught that church is your family, church is your body. But taking a step back, we see something totally different. We see, like I said before, that it was common enemy intimacy. It was who we all hate the same people, or we hate the devil, or whatever. It's also an organization, and in an organization, the organization always comes first. All of the energy, all of the posture is towards new members, new prospects, we used to call them, right? Your posture towards who's coming in one door as people are hobbling out the other door.
Wow.
It's not really a family. It's a faux family, faux community, because it's an organization. And I don't think you or I or anyone else that's ever been a pastor went into it saying, I want to hurt people. But that's exactly what happens when you're focused on the organization, when 70% of the money goes to salaries and buildings and putting on the show, there's very little time left for your grief. And if you stood up on Sunday morning and said, we got to talk about, I'm really hurting. People would try to bypass that and pray that out of you, or whatever they could do to quickly get on with running the organization. That's the water we swam in. That's the conditioning we had. And we had it for so long that we thought it was real.
We thought it was
the best.
The
right?
best, right?
Yeah.
We thought it was right.
And people within that framework, if you try to tell them different, their eyes are focused on what they're doing, preserving the organization, keeping this train running, and they're not always open. But we wanted to talk to those people that are saying, here's how my deconstruction started. It started with the simple question, maybe I'm wrong. What if I'm wrong? And, a nun, a sister one time told me, none of us are right. And that kind of changed my whole thing, right? Just to say, all of us are wrong, right? And once you realize that, then it opens up to, well, let's discover. The desert is not a destination, it's a journey of discovery. It's an adventure. Adventures can't be scripted, and adventures don't have a belief statement. They don't have a creed. They don't have an order of service. It's an adventure, right? It's a lifestyle. So,
Can I say something too about like family? Because we just talked about this on another podcast. And, when we were inside the walls of the church that said they were our family, right? That was our family. It gave us no time for our true family, right? So Christmases, Easters. I mean, you couldn't travel and spend time with your actual family. You couldn't create, at least that was kind of our experience. You create those really powerful traditions or memories that you want to create because everything's wrapped around the church, right? It's like you've got to be there on Sunday, and you got to be there during, on Christmas Eve service, and you got to be there on Easter service and all those things. So so many different holidays, when all of Karl's family was all together, we were like, sorry, we can't be there. And I just feel like there's so many memories and just beautiful, beautiful things that we missed because church,
Laura kind of laughs at this sometimes, but I'm just really have a hard thing with trunk or treat because people, so line up cars at the church and put candy in the back of trunks and bring people to the church to trunk or treat. And here's the thing about that. We take them out of their real community, away from their real families, to come see us. organizations are real hungry for your time.
Mm,
And so when you go on Christmas vacation, New Year's Eve vacation, it's a week or 10 days or 2 weeks
mhm,
in there for some people. And the organization is hungry for that time. They want your time,
Mm,
because that helps you become you're a prospect. And also, if you're a member, they want that time from you. They want that money from you. Um, and so they have to pull you in. If you're a pastor or a pastor's wife, it's way worse.
mhm.
Like Laura said, I have 4 brothers and sisters that I don't know very well anymore, because I didn't like to be gone on Sundays. We could go see them on a Thursday, but
mm,
that's kind of hard. And then at Christmas, Easter, all of those holidays, I couldn't go when they were gathering, like Laura said. And so it may have been pretending to be my family, but there wasn't any real intimacy there, and it took me away from my
Mhm.
actual
Actual
family,
family.
including my kids and
Right.
my wife
Right.
many
Yeah.
times.
And we kind of like, or I'll speak for myself, I kind of grieve those years in the ministry because, like, while we see that now, like, as a pastor and pastor's wife, we were kind of leading those things, right? You got to be at church, you got to be here, you
mm.
got to be here during this season. So in a way, it's kind of like, you know, you kind of grieve a little bit of that because we were part of that system, you know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Not that we beat ourselves up or anything, but I think it's okay to grieve those things, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
I think it just says that you're human.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I can definitely relate to that because we used to have to schedule vacations and events around church.
Yeah.
Like we had one of our sons that was playing competitive in a traveling baseball team, and
Mhm.
we just said to the coach just very adamantly, hey, we put God first. So if you're going to have tournaments on Sundays, we have to make sure that it's not in the time that we do ministry and things like that. And it
Right.
sounds real pious and everything, but that
No.
brings
Hmm.
me to a segue. I want to talk about a particular chapter in the book, and I want to open this up with an analogy, right? That one of the great, and by great, I mean, fucked up parts of Americana is the whole concept of breaking wild horses. You know
Okay.
that wild horses are corralled, and then they go through a process where they're broken so that
Mhm.
they become service or work animals, right? and
Mhm.
and and
Mhm.
one of the things that we're learning now with animal psychology is that when the horse is broken, we think of the horse being broken physically and made suitable for work, but in reality the spirit of the animal is actually
Right.
broken. And
Mhm.
it's really a horrible thing. And this kind of traces back to slavery and things like that, where you break the spirit of a person in order to make them suitable for work. So you guys wrote a chapter in the book about control, and
Mhm.
you were kind of skating the surface of that rink just a minute ago, but now I
Hmm.
want to take you below the ice and say what is control, and why is this so important for us to understand, be able to identify control, how to look at what the impact it has on our lives, and then how to uh, escape it and wrest the control back for ourselves. So I want
Mhm.
Hmm.
I want you guys to kind of dive into that for a bit.
I'm gonna let
Yeah.
you start
Yeah. I
that.
haven't read that chapter in a while, but here's what I know. Um, everything that's sold is sells better when you start with fear.
Mm.
So as a parent, I didn't consciously think if I'll put some fear in this message, it'll sell. But subconsciously, that's what happened over time. If you can give people something to be
Mhm.
afraid of, the country that just invaded Ukraine is having a hard time uh, taking over that country that's essentially unarmed,
Hmm.
and feared Russia for decades, because Christians told us that's the great enemy. That's the and and obviously it was somewhat of a threat, But as long as we can make you fear that, whether it's politics or salesmanship or religion, if you're afraid, then it's easier to sell to you and it's easier to control you. The organization has to have control. If it doesn't have control, then it's assumed things are going to go off the rails. Things are going to be out of control. We want to be certain. We want to have a set of rules that were fixed, even though the Bible is not that at all. It's not a coherent set of rules that agrees with itself. It's one of the most screwed up documents on the planet, but we used it to incite fear so that we can control. The organization has to have control, and so again, because the needs of that organization come before you, so you need to be under control, in line, following the rules, chanting our mantras, professing to our creeds and our belief systems, so that things will be, things will go the way we want them to go, and then we'll achieve our objectives. So, I think that started maybe with the first Pope, unofficially, and with Constantine, it became more, the empires joined with that. And so you see the same thing now since 1980 or so with the religious right. If we can just get control of Congress and the judges, then things will go our way. They'll be predictable. I like what Keith Giles says. So the first thing to deconstruct in your deconstructing is your certainty. And once you give that up, you can go on a journey, you can go on an adventure. But when you draw a line around something and say, this is what we believe, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. You and I have been in engineering type fields where a methodology is helpful, right? And we liked that when we went into religion because they had not a structured methodology, but I can't think of the right word right now, but we had
framework,
kind of a framework, and they taught us a systematic theology in seminary. So all of that was so things would be under control and so things would be predictable. But that's the journey. That's not an adventure. It's not where we're going to grow. You stop growing when you're controlled.
For me, control was the rules are always changing too. So I get that with control you have rules, but it just always seemed like the rules change, right? Because as soon as there seemed to be a little bit of leeway, then we have to change the rules to get you back in control. So, I saw this and maybe it was just that, as a pastor, wife, and family, our expectations were just, so much higher, which I think is ridiculous. But even things like, I remember, we were at a street dance. We were encouraged by our church to go to this street dance because we were new to the community. It was a small town. It was a great way to meet people. And, we slow danced together. My husband and I didn't go out there and gyrate with some other man. He didn't go out there and, grind on some other woman. It was us. It was a slow dance. And, oh my goodness, that was just that. It's still traumatizing today. We had got so much shit about that from the church that encouraged us to go, but yet it was okay for the church people to be there and to be dancing with whoever, it didn't matter who they were dancing with. That was okay. So it's kind of like, yes, there's rules, but they change or they're different for different people. Right. We were always, what is it called? Oh gosh, I just lost the word. Where you can't have sex before you're married. Purity culture. Purity culture was always a really, really big thing But, at our first church, one of the main families, his daughter got pregnant out of wedlock. And, all of a sudden, like, well, it's not that it's okay, but we don't make that big of a deal of it, kind of thing. So I feel like the rules always change when there's control, because you've got to continue to keep that control. So it's a continuous, or for me anyway, and this is like one of my favorite words that you use, Derrick. It was a literal mind fuck all the time for me. And the thing that I came to realize is that when you have control, there is no love, right? There is no grace. So if you are a church that professes to be Christ-like, how is that Christ-like? That's my question. When you have control that is not showing love, that is not showing grace, that is not Christ-like. I'm not sure how people reconcile that, but that's the kind of stuff that I had to like step away from, because, and I don't say this lightly, it was mentally disconcerting to me. I mean, it was bad.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, I can imagine it's pretty mentally exhausting as well.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's one thing I want to take this point and kind of drill into a little bit deeper, and this is geared more toward you, Laura. Is that
Mhm.
okay? So we're talking about control, but you guys also talked about women
Mhm.
in ministry, or women in the context of the desert journey, and so I want you to kind of speak to the women in the audience about, okay, yeah, so you leave the certainty of religion, the certainty of church, the certainty of Christianity, all that. So now you're out in this space where you're looking, you're seeking, you're going from waypoint to waypoint, and how does this impact, uh, or let me ask, or better yet, how do you help the women who are reading this book? How do you help them to traverse this desert?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I really had to realize about myself is that um I like had to really tap into that inner knowing, okay, my sense of self. And that was really hard for me, because I was always told what I needed to do. And maybe not even told, but you have these like unspoken rules or spoken rules, that of how you need to behave as a pastor's wife, or even inside the church, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
hear so many things about how, we're responsible for so much that goes on in the church. As a pastor's wife, I'm responsible for, making sure that my kids, behave properly, and that I don't do anything that would jeopardize his ministry. But even
Mm.
inside the church, we have two daughters. I was constantly bombarded with ideas of, well, you have to make sure that they're dressed appropriately because they could cause another person to stumble and fall. So it was like all these messages that were in my head that were not really part of who I was. And so even though I say that the desert was very lonely, it was a really good time for me to reflect on what I really valued and what I really thought was important. And that was a even though it's kind of lonely and scary, it really is a great place to be, because
Mm.
you can't I don't think you can move forward until you know those things about yourself. And so, like, I guess that's my encouragement, is that, you know, continue to like ask yourself those questions. I know, like, when we were first deconstructing, I would always ask Carl, what do you think? What do you think? And he would kind of get frustrated with me, because it's like, what do you want to do? What do you know? And I was never really given that permission in like the 20 plus years of ministry.
Mm.
And so, yeah, sometimes you really have to just sit with yourself, and you have to figure out, what what do I think about this? What do I believe about this? So that would be my encouragement, really. I mean, it can feel so lonely. I also just want to like, and I've said this before, and of course the book is out there and people can find me, but I love to dialogue about these things, and I love to sit with other women in, as they're going through this, because I know what that feels like. I know how lonely that can be. I know how you feel like when you get outside of the organization of the church, you do feel this loss of control. And at that moment, you don't see it as a good thing. You see it as I'm going to like literally die out here in the desert, or I'm going to go to hell. That was one of the big things I thought. I'm, going to die tomorrow and I'm just going to go to hell, I guess. And so like wrestling all those things and what I really believed about them. And so like, I love to just sit with other women and, hear their, like I said before, just hear their stories and know that they're sacred, and know that, have them know for maybe even the first time in a very, very long time, that I believe their experience, even if it's not my personal experience. So yeah, that was kind of a roundabout way. I hope it made some
No, that's
sense, but
great.
I guess for me, it was just, I had to really sit with myself and really figure out, and I still am. And actually that's kind of the beauty of it, is I don't feel like I've arrived any place, and I'm okay with that. I'm still figuring out what I think about certain things.
Wow.
When I was
So, like that's
when I
one
was
of the things that Carl says, and I constantly quote this as sitting with myself. That's
Mm,
Mhm.
I don't know if that's your quote, Laura, or if that's Carl's, but I always attribute it to Carl.
probably his.
I say,
It's probably
I've
his.
got to,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got to, you have to sit with yourself first. And but Carl, go
Right.
ahead.
Yeah, so when I was little, I used to hide at a coffee table when people came over. And so I've always been an introvert and always been kind of struggling to get out of my shell. To add to that, in my family, it was a large family. So um, being loud was being obnoxious
Mhm.
and almost sinful to
Mm,
so in a way I kind of lost my voice. And we talked at our last church, we rewrote the Constitution because we were reestablishing the church. And so I wrote it where, um, heads of committees could be on the board, and over half of them were women. But there was an ex pastor also on the board
Mm.
who just couldn't stand that, you know.
mm,
So I've had most of my bosses have been women, most of my doctors have been women. And when I was raising my daughters, I thought about them gaining their voice.
Mm.
Um, but the interesting thing I realized, we we grew up, or we were pastors in the Southern Baptist tradition, which is where Beth Moore is from, one of the best speakers ever, one of the best preachers ever. But she was still silenced to
Mhm.
some degree in that denomination. So I've always kind of been a champion of women, been cheering for women to speak, but within that system, there was just a lot of roadblocks
Mhm.
to that, including what we realized when we wrote the chapter about gaining your voice. I thought it was for Laura, but I realized as a pastor, even though I spoke every week, even though I wrote often for the newsletter and things like that, I really didn't have a voice either, because it was always within a certain lane
Mhm.
that I could speak. Otherwise, you're going to get called into the office, so to speak, and you're going to have to answer for that.
Right.
yeah.
So I know I got off topic a little bit, but not only does the church does systemically and purposefully keep women silent, which is a horrible interpretation of. Anyway, let's don't get into the Bible too much. But I mean, it 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 doesn't just silence women; it silences all of us because you have to stay within the parameters. You can't speak from your heart. And so, like Laura's talking about, when you get out in the desert, you start to deconstruct. You're like, well, who am I? What do I think?
Mm-hmm.
What do I believe? What do I
Right.
even do? Because you've been controlled for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. So this now I want to turn the direction to the second part of the book. You know, basically finding your way in the desert, right? And so I'm looking at the all of the different findings, and you guys make it like it's the way it's structured. It's almost like a scavenger hunt, right? That you, as you're going along, you're looking for these hidden nuggets, these things, these Easter eggs, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
and
mhm,
so I want you guys to talk about what can we find in the desert when we're in the desert, because we're in this space. We need to make the best of it. We need to enjoy the journey, but along the way, we're going to find things that are going to help. We'll be able to put them in our toolbox or put them in our goodie bag and take them along, and they prove useful or joyful as the journey progresses. So I want you guys to talk about that a little bit.
Well, before you talk about that, I mean, I think the most important thing that I'm finding in the desert is self. And I'm not
Mm,
sure if that we mentioned that
mhm,
in the book, but of course it was written like 2 years ago. But I think
mhm,
if I had to add another chapter to it, it would be finding yourself, your true authentic self, finding your beliefs. Um, so anyway, I wanted to preface it by that because I just think that's really important that
mhm.
we find ourselves.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things people talk to us about when they talk about church and religion and things like that is they talk about community. I've already mentioned that a little bit,
Hmm.
how church is sort of a faux community, but we have been able to find genuine. I think that's the
Hmm.
first chapter of the second part. Genuine community in the desert.
Hmm.
The one of the most important things to realize about community is you don't find community all in one place, and you
mm,
don't drive to a building full of homogenous people just like you, who believe like you, who look like you,
Hmm.
who, I mean, um, Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour of the week. Um, so you don't find community there, but we've found some genuine community in the desert.
Hmm.
Um, but you got to realize it's not all at one time, not one time of the week, not in one place. You realize, um, you know, you just have time where all my free time's not going to some church that I drive to.
Hmm.
Now maybe I could connect with my neighbors, my real neighbors, or my Laura and I are so introverted, but we met the three people on the three sides of us here,
Hmm.
and um, some people in our town that we live in. We live in a smaller town. People we work with,
Hmm.
uh, but also people like Derrick and Jason
Hmm.
and Brandy
Hmm.
and so on. But there's community um, almost everywhere we go, and we get some here and some there and some here. Community's not all in one place at a specific time of the week, especially if it's as horrible as organized religion. Um,
Well, and also, I feel like the community that we have now is so very real. It's not, um, I don't feel like it's hit or miss. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like, Derek, we may not talk to you for, a month, let's say. And if, when we do connect, I mean, it's as if no time has passed, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
it's just like this real, um, there's this incredible bond there in the community that we have now that just is, when we were going to church, it was like I really um unless we were doing something church related, there was nothing that was really keeping us from thinking about or doing for each other throughout the week. Right. But on Sundays, yes, we would hug necks and, oh, it's so good to see you kind of thing. But I feel like this is just like, we can be so real and authentic with each other. There's no there's no show that has to be put on. Even if I have a thought or belief that is different from yours or vice versa, we still love each other. There's no trying to change one another. There's no trying to save one another. Like we can just be. We can just be,
Mhm.
which is like so freeing and so lovely to me.
Mhm. When we talked about things like practices, what I've noticed the difference from religion, organized religion, and my practices now, my practices are much simpler,
Mm.
but they're also much deeper. I'm not required to do anything, and the things that I do to keep me centered are more accurately described, like Laura said, as being and becoming, which is real simple, but it's a lot deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So we based the second half kind of off of the Beatitudes, but it's a fresh look at the Beatitudes, indeed. So finding companionship, finding acceptance, true acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this a lot more since we wrote the book. Laura and I talk about the phrase, "It is what it is." When
A bypassing sort of way.
in which our first instinct is to say, well, that's a cop out.
Mm-hmm.
You're bypassing just like we did in church.
Mm-hmm.
But it's than that. It's true acceptance of what is
In the moment too, accepting
Mhm.
what is in the moment,
Mhm.
because like if we use your stroke for example, it is what it is. You had a stroke. Yes.
Mhm.
And this is where you are today, but,
Mhm.
and this is where we are today, but
Yeah.
tomorrow it, may look different.
Mhm.
So it's definitely a more kind of on the terms of acceptance than bypassing.
Yeah. So the phrases that keep coming up for me, my phrase is be where you are and be who you are.
Mhm.
Be present and authentic.
And that can look different
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is beautiful.
So, and it's a being, but being also is not a cop out. Being doesn't mean just sitting on a mountain somewhere. And being is a being and becoming.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a journey,
it's a
right?
process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey. It's not a destination. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a creed.
Mm-hmm.
It's being and becoming. But finding comfort, finding peace,
Mm-hmm.
all of those kind of things.
Yeah.
So what this is what I want to get to is okay. So you wander into the desert, and the desert is not a permanent condition, right? I mean, it's like you may wander, but the geography, the terrain of your journey is going to be different. So what happens when you go out of the desert and you find yourself in a jungle? Or you go out of the jungle and you find yourself into a valley, or you're out of the valley and you find yourself on a mountaintop, or you find yourself on an island in the in the middle of
Mhm.
what I guess what I'm saying is, how do you know when you or what are some of the hallmarks of knowing when you've passed a certain part of your journey? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Okay. So the great phrase from Lord of the Rings, that all who wander are not lost. Right. And
Yeah.
so, but when I was a child, I was a teenager, preteen, we'd walk down the drainage ditch um, for a mile or so. That was back when, the thing on TV was, it's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Because they'd just turn us out, especially in the summer, and we'd be out all day until somebody came out the front door and said, "Your mama said go home," and we didn't even know that person. But then, like, I remember one day went to an elementary school and played on the equipment there, and then as we're up there on top of the equipment, we see a tractor out in the field, and then we'd go, um, mess around with that tractor, probably tear it up and do stuff
Yeah.
to it. But then we look out where we could see now, and we saw some trees and wonder what's out there. So we followed that path till we found a pond, and before you know it, we're doing backflips into the murky water that who knows what's in there. Um, that, that was what I call leaning forward now and saying, what's that over there? Right. And so it's a journey of discovery. It's not where you get to the oasis and that's where all the answers are, which is what our pastors told us. Right. Come here. Here's all the answers. Now you got it. You're good. Draw a circle around it and sit in a pew and give me money. It's not like that. In the desert, the teachers wandered around from place to place, and people were kind of on the move when the desert mothers and fathers were out there in the desert. I mean, that's what it's like. And when you realize, like the sister told me, that none of us is right, that we're living with a sense to some degree of uncertainty, things become clearer, right? You understand a little better some things, but you realize you don't understand everything. And so you keep journeying on. And it's a journey of discovery, right?
Yeah. I would say that I haven't really recognized any milestones necessarily for me. I mean, I don't mind the desert. I think you can find so much beauty, and what I once thought was like vast and alone and dry is like actually very rich with life and vegetation, and just it seems like what I have there is everything I need. I have life there and people like you and our other online community. I have solitude when I need it, right? I can be with myself, and that's good too. So whereas when I first deconstructed and when we first kind of came up like with the desert,
Analogy.
yeah, what?
Analogy.
Thank you. The desert analogy. I remember that we were trying to think of a name like for our podcast, and I just kept thinking sanctuary. I just kept thinking like the desert can absolutely be a sanctuary too, a place where you can go and you can heal from the things that you need to heal. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying, but because I think I've been in the jungle too. And I've been on the mountaintop and I've been in the valley for sure. But I feel like there's a part of me that always comes back to the desert.
Okay.
Maybe I need to investigate that a little bit. I don't know, but I guess I just find beauty there.
I mean, that's cool too, because here's the thing is that, like you said, everybody's voice is sacred. I believe everybody's journey is sacred.
Right.
So if you find yourself in the desert and that happens to be your place of peace, then who is anyone else to judge?
Right.
Like I always say, okay, I'm trying to find my way. I think that like for me, I'm trying to find my way to that white room. The white room that when you go in there, there's nothing. It's emptiness. It's void. And
Right.
so at that point, I have to look within. Now that's me. That's my journey. But that's not everybody's journey. And
Sure.
to assume that that's where everyone should be is not realistic. But
Mm-hmm.
what I want to do now is, like, we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to uh, get from you guys, what is the takeaway? What is the call to action of Out into the Desert? What do you want your readers to glean from this? And then, better yet, what do you want to share with the people that haven't read your book that you think might benefit from it?
Okay. So for me,
Still talking.
I think, it just goes back to what I said before, that and you just reiterated that every story is sacred. Every story is worthy of being believed. And for me, I just, if I could have had one thing, when I was in the church culture as a pastor's wife, it would have been for someone to validate my feelings, my sense of self, um, just to help me not feel so alone. And so that really is hope in at least my portion of the book, is that people would come away and go, I've been there, me too. I'm glad I'm not alone. I'm glad it's not just me. Um, yeah. So I think that would probably be my biggest thing I would want people to take away.
So I told you about Cindy Wong Brandt that said, take a year off. We also heard Sarah Bussey say the church didn't have room for my grief.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of believe that there's only three things you can do with pain. You can either quit, lots of ways to quit. You can just run from thing to thing. You can quit by bypassing over things, just not really dealing with it. Or you can numb it in some way, and religion does a lot of that too. It numbs the pain. It, we have emotional services and things to make us feel something different. We don't ever, and so Sarah said we don't. The church didn't have room for my grief, and so my thing is the only real way to deal with pain is to lean into it and face it. So a few weeks back, I posted something that said, instead of listening to so many sermons, we should be listening to each other. And maybe if we were listening to each other, we get on a podcast and sit with people like you are right now for 45 minutes and really listen to them. If you don't listen to them, you can't do a podcast because what questions to ask next. Right. And it'll be a lot of dead air. That you really have to listen. And those Benedictine sisters taught me that very simply by saying, Derrick, what do you feel? What are you feeling? And when you can get the distractions out of the way and all the extra stuff of life out of the way and say, a part of me feels, when you do that, you're able to heal. But it takes a certain amount of quietness and getting away from the water we're swimming in, the conditioning, the activity of everyday life, to not to do something you have to do every day, or not to do something in a certain way, but really to listen to the universe, to listen to your spouse, to listen to the people you're starting to care about. And when we listen to each other, then that's where true healing comes from. It is like facing darkness. It is hard work, but it's very simple. It's mostly about listening. My biggest practice right now is just to sit and listen. It kind of comes from a religious practice, oddly enough, of centering prayer, of not asking or begging Sky Daddy for anything. It's just about sitting and listening to the universe, if you will, listen to the
To your
collective unconscious, to your own
inner
inner
knowing.
knowing, your inner self.
Mhm.
That's where real healing comes from. It's not when somebody lays their hands on you or says the right prayer or you go through the right mantra or anything like that. It's when you can listen. And so I don't even remember the question I asked, but I think that's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
And it's a good answer. So, if people want to get in touch with you, I'll put the link for the book into the chat, and I'm hoping that this will encourage people to go out, take a look at the book, and buy the book. I think that it will be an encouragement, and also for everybody that's watching. I personally pledge to buy 3 books for anyone who wants to buy the book, and I'll buy the book and make sure that you get a copy. So the first 3 people that request a book, I will buy the book. And so I want you guys to tell us how to get in touch with you, tell us about your podcast, tell us about your blogs, all of that stuff, and then we'll go ahead and we'll put on our cowboy hats and we'll ride off into the sunset.
Okay. So, um, Karl Forehand, Karl with a K, forehandlikentennis.com. That points to almost everything we do. We have a podcast called The Desert Sanctuary. We have a Facebook group called The Desert Sanctuary, and I have a blog called The Desert Sanctuary on Pathos. So about everything we do is called The Desert Sanctuary, and you can find the book everywhere. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Target and Walmart, and um, you might think about supporting your local booksellers. There's even something called Book Source, I think, or something like that, where you can help support your local booksellers. So it's just available everywhere. One of our things is we're doing a fundraiser this end of the year for the Desert Sanctuary, because throughout the year we give away, like Derrick's doing right now, we give away a lot of books. And we had the Kindle at 99 cents for quite a while because we just want people to have this evaluation, this discussion. The question is organized religion viable in the 21st century? And the longer we're away, the longer we believe that it's not viable at all. And if people are still deep in religion, I just want to say I understand, and I know what the hold is there. But we want you to be bold and be brave and ask the tough questions.
Right.
And listen.
Exactly.
Cool. So you guys
Cool.
have any closing thoughts before we, like I said, ride off into the sunset?
My only closing thought is just, we really appreciate you having us on today. This has been a really good conversation for me. I think it still continues to help me heal when I'm able to talk about these things. And I just like that. That's kind of my heart, is that I want to see others come to some sort of healing from religious trauma. And so forth. So thank you so much for having us on today. This has been a really good conversation. You made me think about a lot of things, because we wrote the book 2 years ago and so much of it is still incredibly applicable. But I always feel like I'm never done deconstructing. And I know, like, Derrick, I've sent you like private messages and things like that just to kind of get your take on things. And so, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for having us.
My pleasure. So that's it, folks. Carl has something else. I'm sorry, Carl. Go ahead, man.
No, it wasn't really. I was just going to say, not only does our practices get simpler, but kind of understanding gets simpler. In that it boils down to words, and words become more important. Words like compassion, kindness, authenticity, presence, being, being and
Mhm.
becoming.
Mhm.
So I'd encourage you. I have a friend that can talk about like one word for 45 minutes. And it kind of becomes that thing of what are, what are those thoughts and words that are the most important? And can we center our life around those things instead of doctrines and
Mhm.
creeds and, and practices of the church and things
Mhm.
like that? But get down to those words that are absolutely true, like love. Um,
Mhm.
and that's if we're gonna camp out or stop anywhere, it's on those type of things, and we
Right.
can hover around them as we keep going on the journey.
Mhm.
The end.
The end. Karl and Laura Forehand, guys, two of my best friends, two of the most wonderful
Mm,
people on the planet. They've written
yeah.
some excellent books. Karl's written Apparent Faith, Being, The Tea Shop. All of those are good books, and of course, the book that we're talking about today, Out into the Desert. You can get these books anywhere. Get these books. Get these books, and they will encourage you. So, with that being said, thanks for attending our TED Talk. This this is a thing that Aaron and I came up with, that we said we're gonna end all of our broadcasts with this. Thanks for ending.
I love
Thanks
it.
for
Yeah.
attending our TED Talk. So anyway, thanks for coming, Karl and Laura. Thank you for being here today. And you guys stick around for just a minute. And for those who are watching, peace and hair grease.